A lot of people that are going to be confronted with the reality of, I thought I could do this job forever. I learned all the ins and outs, and that job has more or less been automated and completely eliminated. Do you either stop trying to learn how to play individual instruments and learn how to conduct orchestras, or you get out of the field altogether? All those entry-level jobs, like those are gone. And that's scary for anybody that's trying to step into a role and learn the ropes. We live in a world where you can get educated on the internets, right? You can go to YouTube and type in tutorial on name the tool, and you can actually practice and get stuff done without having to pay anybody.
Welcome to the Patreon podcast. Here, there's no fluff and no sales pitches, just real conversations. I'm your host, Christy Christensen. And at Patreon, we bring together bold, curious founders and leaders to share their stories, their lessons they have learned, and the hard truth behind their success. We are all about challenging the status quo and explore fresh perspectives while focusing on what really matters. People. If you're craving deeper conversations, you're in the right space. So let's dive in. Taylor, thank you so much for joining the Patreon podcast. I always start asking the guests to share a fun fact as they introduce themselves. So by all means, share a little bit about who you are and a fun fact, please.
Sure. My name's Taylor. I'm a 6-time startup founder, originally from Washington, D.C. Fun fact, I've been in Denmark for almost 9 years. I was on a reality show about moving to Denmark ages ago.
What do you focus on these days? Work-wise?
I've been putting a lot of time into learning how to build out different automation workflows, working within make.com. I've started playing with a few different LLMs and some building tools like Cursor. So yeah, trying to get myself out of my comfort zone and do some of the work that I've spent years doing more or less manually and doing it in a more automated fashion, which is frustrating, exciting, and interesting, all kind of wrapped up into one.
And you mentioned that you've started multiple startups. Are you on a new venture now, or?
Yeah, I think, we go through different journeys as individuals and entrepreneurs. When you have to shut down one endeavor, you hold off for a period of time, maybe licking your wounds, maybe building up more of a knowledge base. I feel like I'm in that segment. I spent the last year working for an AI company, and it just wasn't my project. Ultimately, I'm trying to build out a couple of structures to take another run at it.
And then if we should talk about your career journey, your adventures, and you as a founder, can you share a little bit about your biggest challenges in a business?
Sure. It depends on the nature of what one is trying to build. When I was building my agency, I found the challenges surprising. Most of my new clients weren't locally based. In a country of 5.8 million people, Danes tend to like to work with other Danes. And when you are seen as an outsider, it creates a challenge in order to get new and interesting clients. That pushed me into new niches I wouldn't have focused on, but that opened up a lot of doors and gave me a lot of exposure into blockchain, crypto, Web3, and I'm much happier for it. But obviously, I think the challenge of understanding the market that you're in is one that I think a lot of people miss out on, or at least are exposed to at a very early basis, and I certainly was.
And besides going into niches, as you just mentioned there, Web3, for example, what else did you learn and what did you do to accommodate this new market where you felt like an outsider?
There's lots of different learnings that all happen at once when you're trying to build your own thing. I think when you are infused into either a larger company or even a small startup, you know who to ask to figure stuff out. You don't have that luxury other than maybe your limited network when you are a solopreneur. I've seen that firsthand with my wife, who until a year ago had never started her own business. I vicariously lived through her, watching some of the starting and stops and stumbles that happen when you're trying to get out of the gates. There's tons of learning that you get at scale when you do things by yourself, as opposed to relying on other resources.
What would be the one thing, one advice you would give from your own learnings and observations?
There's so many different areas. I think the primary one is everything is possible and anything can be learned. And a lot of people shy away from new or challenging circumstances because anything in the unknown is scary. I've certainly seen that up close with a lot of people that I'm talking to that are still doing things extremely manual and old school. And I would say a lot of ways that they used to work are still the case. And it's, you don't have to do that. There's tools for that. And I think a lot of people just refuse to acknowledge, oh, I could do it that way, but I like doing it my way. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. Well, let's see how that works out in the long term.
What do you see that is the biggest change when you talk about automation and changing ways of working, doing things more effectively? What do you see is changing in that space?
I think being able to articulate what you're trying to do is becoming a much more pronounced skill set. It's more than prompt engineering, it's understanding the entire system that you're trying to either build or push something through, as opposed to understanding step one is this and step 10 is that. You really have to understand how to categorize what does good look like and then really methodically go through. And I don't know. I find that a lot of people maybe don't have that level of curiosity or aren't interested in seeing the inner workings. And so they sometimes get stuck or stumble.
Mm. Are there a way for people to have you seen a way where people can trigger that curiosity or anything that you find helpful to stay curious?
That's a great question. I'm of the persuasion that you really can't learn curiosity. So a lot of people don't have that in them. And I've never understood those types of people. You don't want to know why. You're not even remotely incredulous how somebody did something. There's certain types of people that have a bit more of that. I don't know if it's more of an ADHD brain. I don't know if it's just the way that you were raised. There's certain kids that I'm sure you're around them and the why. I think I was probably one of those kids.
Mm.
I like to figure things out, take things apart and put them back together. I'm always a bit confused by people that don't have as much of that streak in them. I don't know how to infuse that. I think curiosity is something that's made within you.
What does that mean to you, curiosity?
Well, that's a fair question. I think it is trying to understand things beyond the surface level, or somebody makes a very bold or generalized statement. And it's okay. Do you want to investigate further, or are you bored with the concept that's being presented? I think when you get into any individual type of work, you start to understand that the beauty is in the details. And the deeper you dig into something, the more you realize, wow, there's so much here to unpack. And it's like the Dunning-Keurig effect, where you essentially think you understand something from the outside. And once you actually get in, you realize you don't know anything. So you have a much deeper level of appreciation for something. And it takes a long time to get up to that expert level. Most people, when they see stuff from the outside, maybe don't approach the idea in a way of, I really want to see what this is and deconstruct it, because people are busy or things just don't spark curiosity or interest. I'm not sure why that is.
Do you think now with digital transformation, and you mentioned your interest in Web3 and blockchain and so on, and now we have AI, do you think the growth mindset, the curiosity is going to weigh more important in the future or now than it perhaps did in the past?
I think it depends on somebody's circumstances. I think a lot of people were very secure with their role or their job, and they thought they might be able to stay with the company for a couple of decades and maybe get a gold watch after 25 years of service. If you're reading any headlines about employment, it's probably one of the hardest times to either get a new job, enter the market, or for some people, reinvent in order to get back into the workforce. I think there's a lot of people that are going to be confronted with the reality of, I thought I could do this job forever. I learned all the ins and outs, and that job has more or less been automated and completely eliminated. They figure something out or they're in for a very tough ride. One of the most important things that people could be doing, I don't understand why people are apprehensive about embracing this type of thing, whether it's automation, AI. It reminds me a lot. I was having a conversation the other day with other marketers, And the way that people went from doing traditional advertising, which newspaper, print, magazines, there was a big shift when digital advertising became a thing. And you had a lot of old school folks that were like, oh, I'm not changing. Everybody looks at billboards, everybody reads magazines. And if you look over the last, say, 15, 20 years, that shift has become extremely pronounced. If you relied purely on your knowledge of traditional advertising, you'd be in a pretty tough spot right now. We're undergoing the same shift. I probably won't need somebody to really know how to run Google search ads or even know how to do SEO or content writing to the degree that those jobs will be eliminated in favor of tools that do it all and more. That means you either stop trying to learn how to play individual instruments and learn how to conduct orchestras, or you get out of the field altogether, because I see this happening extremely fast.
And when we go back to what you said in the beginning, that you're currently going through your own development and curiosity of learning new skills, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're curious about and diving into these days?
It stemmed from a bit of a frustration. I've done a ton of keynote speaking over the years, showing off my playbooks, my workflows. I realized as I was redoing my course towards the end of last year that maybe a lot of it, I would say theoretically, is still relevant to a degree, but I think in a very short period of time, a lot of the stuff in terms of step-by-step sequences is going to be completely gone. And so I think of the types of things that I was able to garner a lot of success with. So let's take outreach, for example. The way that I had to really build up lots of individual elements in order to run a successful outreach campaign. And we're talking, it's not the sexiest thing in the world. It's B2B, like cold email stuff. It is GDPR compliant, but the way that I had to do that was extremely labor intensive in terms of creating a bunch of burner domains, adding burner emails to it, enriching those, warming those up, then putting them through an email automation platform, then finding leads and running these things. You're looking at 4 or 5 tools that can now be chained together with only a few hours in between, and you can essentially reach hundreds of thousands of people within the span of a month. That tools like Clay are the beginning of that, which spun out of some of the use cases that came out of formerly Integromat, but now it's make.com. Zapier has been very quick to jump into that. Some of the stuff that I've played with and enjoyed is some of the outreach stuff. I'm finding a lot of the data collection to be really fast and easy. Let's say I want to be a guest on podcasts. I can find 10,000 podcasts with just a handful of clicks and then run enrichment and outreach the same way.
Yeah.
So you're looking at stuff that I normally probably would have grabbed an intern or a virtual assistant. I'm doing it without any of those things, which does not bode well for people that are trying to enter the job market. All those entry-level jobs, like those are gone. And that's scary for anybody that's trying to step into a role and learn the ropes. So from my standpoint, anything operationally, I'm able to start connecting different tools in a way that I was never able to do.
And do you think with entry jobs, it's a matter of the job description changing? It's more about how they now need to manage and support.
Will there be entry-level jobs in the future? I think for sure, yes, there's always going to be that. But it's reminiscent of 2008 for me. So I graduated in December of 2008, which was essentially like the height of the economic crisis. For years, I was unable to find like real legitimate jobs that actually paid people real salaries in order to then be in a place that I didn't have a ton of skills in order to learn as I went. So that was honestly how I got into building my own businesses and working with really talented entrepreneurs, was essentially working for free underneath very eccentric and interesting characters. And that led to a very steep learning curve, but I got into it. I'm seeing the exact same types of fake businesses pop up left and center, commission only type of roles, sweat equity roles that are incredibly demanding on individuals, but essentially there's no reward at the end of that because they're in many cases unproven business models or just churn or burn type of environments. So it's going to be incredibly difficult for people to enter the market now unless they're interested in picking up some of these newer tools that people have not really acclimated to yet.
It also brings a whole new ask for the newcomers or the junior workers to understand the technology for them to also be relevant in the workforce.
Yeah, there was a time where I was certainly eager. I just didn't have the skill set. And so I was left with options that weren't interesting to me. One was you can always go work construction. Not really anything against that, but I don't want to do that. Another is, oh, you can learn to code. And I'm thrilled to a degree that I didn't immediately chase that because it wasn't my calling. It wasn't something that was necessarily interesting to me. And the latter was to pick up something within a learnable area that I can start to tinker with. We live in a world where you can get educated on the internets, right? You can go to YouTube and type in tutorial on name the tool, and you can actually practice and get stuff done without having to pay anybody. That wasn't a thing 10 years, 15, 20 years ago. And I'm always baffled by people that never took the time to do that. I think it's the same thing when you talk with people. We're locked down collectively as a society for 2.5 years. What'd you do at the time? A lot of people watched a lot of Netflix. And it's like, all right, if you were going to do something great, that would have been the time. There's never a better time than now, but there's just certain drivers that I think you need to flip on in order to get out of your own funk or get forward. But those are my thoughts. I don't know. The rantings of a crazy person.
Do you see that the traditional lead gen funnel in marketing is fundamentally changing due to these new tools and automation and everything just being able to be put up a few notches when it comes to the speed of things?
I think it's without a doubt changing drastically. People are maybe unaware of how quickly that's happened or just unaware that it's happened and shifted without noticing. If you look at the overall search volume on Google, it's gone down significantly over the last 3 years. That is a direct result of people using ChatGPT and other LLMs to find answers. Now, those answers would have come with ads, and you would have been able to scroll and end up on pages that would have brought us to different businesses, different service providers. That ain't happening anymore. So that makes for a really interesting environment to say, how do I get into a place where I'm in front of the people that don't know about me or are looking for solutions by typing short form phrases inside LLMs? I think that provides a new and interesting way of trying to do more kind of chat-based marketing. I think you're also seeing a lot of people use social media in a different way, and it's a lot higher caliber content in terms of trying to present something that isn't an ad, but is done in a way that it's like, oh, I want to see what that is. That was really neat. I want to find out how I can get whatever this person's showing off. And there's pros and cons to doing that. But I think the traditional ways of trying to pull in lots of visitors are going away. And it's becoming a lot less productive to spend time on the old channels and the old methodologies of working.
And speaking of methodologies and old ways of working, are there any processes or frameworks or any new initiatives that you are working on that you think is going to be driving the near future of rather that being marketing or something else?
I realized when I was running my agency, and it continues to baffle me as I've gone into different blockchain projects or worked with different startups, that there is the loss in how people know how to discover things and determine the differences between things. I've often put different people into a task of, hey, I need 10 different proxy servers to run a bunch of bot LinkedIn accounts. Find me 5 service providers that are selling proxies and give me the prices. After a day of searching, they're like, oh, I could only find 2. And it's okay, proxy servers are cheap and easy to find. I don't understand how that's possible. The reality is, I think you have a generation that was never taught how to search. You have people that never had a format in which they could take an input and figure something out. We're getting to a point with, I use a tool called Monica. I don't love to name drop them because I feel like I got bait and switched with their pricing structure, but I actually use it every day. And it allows me to basically do browsing with a agent GPT on top of it to be able to build up lists of different things and then run different filters on top of it, which ultimately allows me to do a lot more selection. If I want to dissect a certain tool to determine whether or not it's relevant for me, find different options when I'm trying to look at different partners, maybe I just want to build a really cool list of direct competitors. All of that is feasible now without me having to manually Google search. I've had to teach people a basic framework of collection and prompting to get them a foundation. The biggest challenge I run into, and I'm not sure if you've seen it, I've done a ton of guest lectures at the universities here in Copenhagen. And it's baffling when after the lecture, I have students asking me, like, why aren't they showing us this stuff in school? But yeah, I think the skills that one would need to learn in order to foundationally be able to grow into either a job or some type of career, those aren't being taught. So you really have to go out and find them and make it work for you. That's a hard thing to do when you don't really know where to start.
Yeah, because if you don't know what you don't know, it's going to be hard to figure out how to build on something you don't know.
If you don't have the curiosity and don't know what to ask, you're more or less not going to be asking anything. You'll be looking around going, how is everybody else doing? Fine. I think a lot of people are struggling to get through basic work. And just on that note, I recently went to an event that you put on, and I haven't worked within a corporate environment in many years. One of my clients was a large pharmaceutical company here in Denmark. I was shocked at the lack of comprehension of basic marketing best practices. When you work for a large company, it's very difficult to continue to infuse new and interesting thoughts and execute against them in that environment. And I think you'll see that there's a lot of people that will graft onto small companies in order to get more experience and do something.
And when we're looking at lessons learned, people who are in similar situations, looking to build their own business or wanting to learn something new, but they don't know how to actually go about it, what would you say they should do? What's your go-to if you wanted to learn something new, but you don't? How do you actually start that journey of developing your own skill sets?
Yeah, there's a lot packed into that. So let's break it apart. Somebody's dabbling with the idea of entrepreneurship, which I always encourage people to do because you learn a lot about the world, a lot about people, a lot about yourself in the act of doing that. I think the same thing I do when I'm trying to take the missus out for dinner. And so we establish, what do you not want to eat today? What are you not interested in having for dinner? And that eliminates very quickly 30, 40, even 50% of the options out there. I tend to do that with certain lines of business. So if you are not interested in anything fintech related, SaaS related, automation related, that takes a lot off the table.
Mm.
Now, some of the reasons that you might not be interested is because you don't know about it. And anything else, the more that you learn, the more intriguing things become, the more interesting it becomes. But I've seen a lot of people narrow things down quickly because they know they don't want anything to do with automobiles, transportation, logistics. It's okay, cool. That's not your jam. I totally get that. But eliminating the stuff that you don't want to do, really easy. Relying on previous experience, anything that you've been exposed to, is a huge step in the right direction. There's this anecdote. If you've read 3 books on any singular topic, you are on par with any expert within that field. If you are curious about an area and want to consume some information, I'm not talking about watching TikToks, actually diving into content related to that field and understanding it at a deeper level, that gives you at least a cue and an understanding of what's there. The last step is the one that I always screwed up. Every entrepreneur probably doesn't do enough of that, which is talking to real potential customers. I have always done that Steve Jobs type thing, which is people are going to want whatever it is that I build for them. They'll want what I make. I don't need to ask my customer what they need. The reality is you absolutely need to do that. Before you ever go build something, it is incredibly important to talk to your end user, the people that would pay money for this. I've made that mistake 3 or 4 times in my career, and I think I would have gotten back years of my life had I taken that advice. So it's incredibly important to me to make sure that I do that wherever I end up or whatever I end up building. And yeah, I think those are the big areas Beyond that, there's thousands of little lessons, but I think that's the framework to at least get started with wading through a swamp of ideas and thoughts and aspirations. I think often the biggest thing that most people miss is not eventually just getting started. And a lot of people burn up crazy amounts of time of just pontification and nothing gets started. And that's also super dangerous. We all could spend years doing research without ever actually moving in one direction, which is very dangerous.
Yeah. When do you think people should say, actually, I've done enough research, I have read enough, I have scratched the surface enough, I've done all the due diligence that I could, now I should just do? Do you have a feeling or an experience from your past that is the trigger for you to say, okay, now is enough, I need to just go and do?
Yeah. These days, I'm down to 3 or 4 accelerators that I work with on a regular basis. Historically, I've worked with close to 20 different accelerators, everything from university accelerators to more well known accelerators that are in very deep niches like Techstars Web3 Accelerator. The thing that I always prompt people to do is find where this exists in the wild. There is a minuscule chance that you're going to be the first person to come up with a unique business. And in all reality, if you are, it's probably not that good of a business, or you're brilliant, but it's probably not that. If you can't find a single competitor to the concept you're doing, then you're screwed. This is the free market. And if nobody else has built what you're trying to build, there's a really good reason for that. It's because it doesn't need to exist. I can't tell you how many startups I have personally sat across from people and I'm like, I get that you're enthusiastic about whatever this solution is, but maybe the reason you're not able to find any customers or you're not getting any traction is because nobody needs this thing. Therefore, nobody has built it. Therefore, it doesn't exist. For some reason, people are like, I spent a lot of time thinking. It's like, pivot. You can do a little side move. It's cool. There's lots of different ways to react to what the market actually wants. And to that point, it's so rare, but I see it every once in a while where somebody comes out with something that's interesting enough, maybe one iteration away from something that exists in the market, and people are literally lining up around the corner to get that thing or signing up to a wait list. And I'm not saying that everybody who's listening to this is going to go create the next chat GPT that literally had 10 million people on the wait list. But if people aren't lining up for it, it's maybe not the most interesting thing you could be doing. Go get something that allows you to have a couple of little success iterations as opposed to continuously slogging with your nose against the grindstone, trying to get something out of nothing.
And again, go out and speak to the customer, because then that perhaps also help you from spending a lot of time on something that may actually not be needed.
That's super common. I've done so many lectures or workshops within these different accelerators, and the amount of people that pick up the stuff I give them is so small. I think having a bit of, I don't know as much as I think I know, and if there is something that can fix my problem or there is a solution to this, maybe I should try this out. I don't know how to infuse that into people, but is extremely valuable if you can put aside the ego and actually be focused on taking action towards something that is going to create a result. You're probably right. I'm just going to go back and do it my way.
So that curiosity comes back in a way. If we were to move forward and we were looking ahead, who are you following these days that you find super inspiring and help challenge your viewpoint?
That's a good question. Not enough people. I think the nature of trying to follow different creators has escaped me. There's a few that I would say off of TikTok that I actually do admire that are doing a number of interesting fast builds. So like the idea is like, oh, here's how I automated Google Sheets to my conversion form, then built out an automated workflow, which allowed me to send follow-up emails and automate billing. So that's like Preston Hodes, I guess is his name. I can send a few links, but yeah, there's not any one individual that I go nuts for. I read Martel's book more recently that was really interesting. It's called Buy Back Your Time. It helped me with a lot of powerful thoughts. If I'm doing something that I could pay somebody half to do, then I don't have to think about it. I don't have to touch it. And it's this repetitive thing, then go do it. Or if I could automate something by spending a day automating it, and then I save 20, 30 maybe even an hour a day every week, that time compounds and adds up. I try to tease out learnings where I can. I would say that I'm always looking for interesting influencers, but don't always find them.
So, what do you think will define the next 5 years?
It really depends on the vertical. If we're talking about B2B products, I think we're entering a space where things can be back engineered practically overnight. The reason that startups get investment or small companies tend to get investment or market leaders hold on to whatever their bread and butter is for a long period of time is they have some defensibility of the market or their business because they have, I don't know, this tool that would be really difficult to build, or they have the smartest people that are able to create this kind of really quick and easy user experience that ultimately gives the user what they want. Those are going to be things that with a few strokes of the keyboard are essentially clonable. I spent quite a bit of time amassing like 180, 200 lifetime deal tools that I purchased for hundreds of dollars at a time. I'm realizing very quickly that the majority of those tools are going to be wildly irrelevant in probably a year or two when you can literally plug in a really baseline prompt and get the exact output of not only the tailored version of your favorite tool, but able to build on top of it naturally using human language and not having to code at all. That's literally happening today. So I would say the world looks really different in the next 3 years. In the next 5 years, I think very serious conversations will go down about UBI, universal basic income, because I think there'll be just a large amount of people that are like, I have skills, put me to work. I want to do something. And yeah, I think it's an interesting time and a very scary time, depending on how you look at it.
Who has been an inspiration for you through your journey?
I don't know.
I feel like there were some flashbacks happening there.
I'm trying to think that there's lots of different versions of that. A lot of people I know that have gotten into entrepreneurship, more than half of them have this crazy founder story of I was working for the worst human being in the world and I realized that I could do a better job, or my life was a mess because the company I was at was just destroying my soul. That type of psychology really does propel people in a direction that it's surprising. So I would say that I've gotten a lot of inspiration from setbacks. I've gotten a lot of momentum from my life partner and wife. As far as individual people, they come and go with seasons, and there's certain characters that I used to admire from afar. Let's say Gary Vaynerchuk, because of his loud, boisterous, no bullshit attitude towards everything, but I don't see him as amorously as I once did. Ask me tomorrow, I might have a different answer, but a lot of my inspiration came from bad experiences that I wanted to build my own journey. And some of the influencers or characters that I used to follow and think were great, they come and go.
Taylor, I have really enjoyed our conversation. There were so many good inputs and stories and thought-provoking concepts, and I really appreciate your time. Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here on the Patreon podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed your event, and I hope everything continues to climb and scale the way you want it to.
If this episode gave you something to think about, I'll be really grateful if you could share this with your LinkedIn network. And to make sure you don't miss out on any new episodes, simply follow Patreon wherever you are listening or watching. And just a note, the opinions and views shared by our guests are entirely their own and don't necessarily represent the businesses they work for. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. Until next time, bye for now.